Hello to my studio teacher friends. Welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast, hosted by me, Christina Whitlock, your self appointed anytime piano teacher friend. I have been working on an episode for the past several weeks. It's about money, one of our least favorite things to talk about, I know. But as I was putting the finishing touches on it this past week, I found myself coming back to an episode I originally published last spring. It was episode number 126, titled Cheers to Mixing Business with Compassion. I wasn't planning to air a replay episode this week, but the more I thought about that particular episode, the more I felt compelled to share it again with you this week. I don't know, I just feel like there are teachers out there who just really need to hear that message. Maybe they need to hear it for a second or a third time. I don't know. But that's what we're going to do today. So sit back and enjoy this encore replay of episode 126. Cheers to mixing business with compassion. Okay, I think it's safe to say that this is one of the hardest things about independent teacher life, isn't it? Like knowing how to show compassion to your studio families, but also knowing how to run a profitable business. Well, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is a dynamic without lots of nuance. Of course it is. There are very few situations involving human beings where black and white thinking is actually reasonable. That's the main reason, actually, that I don't talk about a lot of things pertaining to studio policies or tuition structures or any of that kind of stuff here on the podcast. I'm actually really passionate about all those things, but I prefer to tackle those topics when I work with teachers one on one because there are just too many factors at play for me to sit here and tell you without question how you should be running your business. But I did want to make one really important distinction today. Are you ready? My friends, you can show compassion to your studio families in lots of ways without putting yourself in financial hardship. I'm going to say it again because it's really pretty much the whole thing today. You can show compassion to your studio families in many ways without putting yourself in financial hardship. Somewhere along the line, many studio teachers I know began to equate the idea of being compassionate with giving our services away for free or at a reduced cost. I'll just say that I consider myself to be an incredibly compassionate person. Humble too, apparently. But I'm pretty sure my studio families would agree with me on that. I do show compassion to my studio families in all kinds of ways. But I'm also not one to make exceptions on what I charge. And again, there is nuance here. I am in a fortunate position of being very much in demand in my area. So I don't want to pretend that that's not a huge factor in how securely I find myself in this position. I know it certainly helps. But when I wasn't this popular of a teacher, I like to think that I still held a similar point of view. So before we go further, I just have to say, are there times when we can make financial exceptions for students? Of course. I would never say never on that one. In fact, I do have an entire episode on my theory regarding making exceptions. That's episode 53. It's titled Considering Exceptions. And I will be sure to link that in the show notes for this episode because I think it's very relevant. So, while there may be some instances where financial flexibility will feel like a compassionate option on your part, I want to offer a very clear reminder to you that dealing with financial business is not the only way to support your studio families in difficult times. What are some other options? Well, they are as numerous as the hairs upon my head. Above pretty much anything else, I want to remind you that human beings carry with us this innate desire to be seen and known. So, for me, that means that the first step in showing compassion to anyone in my life is to acknowledge the way they must be feeling. There are very few things you can do to solidify a relationship more than just acknowledging how someone feels. If I have a student who seemed to have a difficult time during our lesson, I can follow up with their parent in the next day or so and just ask how they're doing. I think you would be amazed at how pleasantly surprised parents are when you do that kind of stuff. If the family is going through a difficult time, again, I can send a text midweek to let them know that I'm thinking about them. I can drop a new piece of sheet music off on their doorstep if I think it's going to bring a smile to my student's face. I can arrange for a meal to be delivered, whether that's by me or through something like DoorDash. I can offer to be flexible in how we approach our lessons for the next however many weeks. I can shift my expectations around progress or what areas that we're going to be focusing on during the lesson. I can send a card in the mail. I can gift a book that might be helpful. I can record myself playing a piece of music that they might enjoy. I can arrange for other students in my studio to make a video or draw pictures, or I don't know. There are so many things one can do. Depending on the situation, I happen to believe that there are always ways we can show compassion that are apart from financial exceptions. And I say this today because I think that's immediately what we consider when we find out a family is struggling, right? Sometimes we start thinking about how we can make financial exceptions before a family even asks for them. And again, sometimes we are in positions where we can afford to help a family financially. I'm in such a situation right now, and I feel great about it. But at the same time, life is constantly changing. And especially in today's economic landscape, there are few among us who don't feel like finances are challenging right now. But truthfully, if your needs are not being met, and in this case, we're going to acknowledge that needs can encompass many things, many of which are related to finances. But if your needs are not being met, then you are not going to be your most effective teacher self. See, thinking of your studio as a profitable business sounds slimy to some of you, doesn't it? Not all of you, but some of you are out there feeling a little gross when I say that your studio should be a profitable business. But profitable does not mean that you're taking advantage of your clientele. It just means that you are able to live the life that you need to live to be your most inspiring self. There is something about being a musician that carries with it these unspoken expectations throughout society. There is this underlying notion that, oh, playing music is fun. Therefore, this professional musician must want to play as much music as they can so they can have more fun, right? Or there's the teacher equivalent of, oh, teaching music is so good for kids. Therefore, if that piano teacher is a good person, she must want to teach music to as many kids as possible so she can keep doing good things in the world. Friends, please realize that we operate in a profession that is met with many unspoken expectations that we should not require a living wage to do what we do. And I just have to say that if you also happen to be a woman, or if you grew up in certain faith traditions, you need to recognize that you have extra subconscious narratives running through your brain about the importance of prioritizing service, even if it comes at the cost of yourself. That's a whole thing. I'm obviously not going to go there today. But again, my primary goal is to help you realize that compassion and financial sacrifice are not one in the same. I'll tell you the number one way I see this play out in music teacher world: the ever debated concept of makeup lessons. Now, if you give makeup lessons, I am not coming after you here. So you do what works for you. That's the beauty of our profession. But if makeup lessons do not work for you, I just want to point this out. I don't give makeup lessons, yet my studio families consider me to be a very compassionate person. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. I can be sorry that Billy is sick today, or I can be excited that Lacey got an invitation to her friend's birthday party. I can express all those emotions and let families know that I understand why they're not going to be here. But that does not mean that I have to take a financial hit for those developments. It's not the way that I am going to be able to live a life that meets my needs. I've been there, done that, and it doesn't result in me being my best teacher self. I get stressed out, I get grumpy, I feel like I'm doing families these big, huge favors, and I end up feeling like they should be so appreciative of my flexibility, yet they tend to not ever give it a second thought. So, that is not a good way to foster like happy, happy, happy musical experiences. Okay, have I beaten that horse enough yet? I want you to say this with me one more time. You can show compassion to your studio families in many ways without putting yourself in financial hardship. Okay, friends, now it's time for a toast. Studio music teacher friends from all around the world, I hope I have convinced you today that compassion and financial sacrifice are not always the same thing. Sure, they can exist together, but you also can have one without the other. It's possible. And I also happen to think it's necessary. I've said it a million times here in this space, but remember that money is personal. And if you find yourself at a point where you feel like you keep giving up more and more of those dollars, it is going to be difficult not to find yourself approaching your lessons from a point of resentment. I don't know about you, but I don't think the world needs any more resentful teachers. I think we need teachers who are excited to show up for their students. And as much as we are conditioned to think otherwise, being properly compensated for our time and our effort goes a long way toward keeping teachers excited to show up for work. I rest my case. I say cheers to you and your multifaceted, very compassionate selves, friends. Here, here. Thank you for tuning in for today's Encore Replay, my friends. As I said, I will be back next week talking to you about money, though from a much different perspective. I hope you will join me for that. And if you are interested in more of the ways that I can help support you on your teacher journey, don't be shy. Feel free to reach out and ask questions or make observations on Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Beyond Measure Podcast on both those platforms. Or you can send an email to me at beyondmeasurepodcast@gmail.com. I promise I would absolutely love to hear from you. So, with that, I say onward and upward, my friends, to understanding those distinct lines between business and compassion.